Well, it happened again this week, a scene made all too familiar by recent history in the United States. An angry young white man who had serious emotional problems brought an assault rifle, 500 rounds of ammunition into an elementary school. The media has assiduously avoided mentioning the fact that the McNair Discovery Learning Academy just outside of Atlanta is a predominantly black school. And I don't want to imply racial motivation where there is none, and certainly we know that the shooter had very recently threatened to kill his own brother, but I'm just saying that when a crazy white man takes a military-style weapon into a black school, there may be reason to at least ask the question about whether racial rhetoric provoked the event. The now infamous weapon, the AK-47 assault rifle, should not be in the private possession of any citizen, whether that person is ex-military or a policeman or policewoman or a sportsman. It is not a recreational toy. It is a weapon of warfare. And for the same reason that no one is allowed to keep hand grenades or cannon in their homes, no one should have a gun that makes it very easy to kill 100 people in a minute. And yet, thanks to the NRA and the donation-addicted, cowardly, irresponsible elected officials in Congress, even a crazy man like this shooter in Georgia has access to military weapons. And I'm not going to say the shooter's name today. I wish the media would take up the same practice. People should not believe that they will get 15 minutes of fame by committing a crime of this sort. No one should think that they're going to get their face on TV and their family story told and their sad saga in front of the entire world by committing a heinous crime. Besides, I'm not sure that there's much to be gained in conversation about the motivations of crazy people. I am, once again, ready to reinstitute Great Britain's old plan of shipping all of their problems off to a distant island. I would love to be able to put all of the NRA executives, their gun manufacturer puppet masters, and their lapdog Congress members on an island far, far away and see how long it would take for them to become cannibals. If I've not been clear enough about this in the past, let me spell it out. The gun manufacturing business, with their lackey NRA spokespersons and bought and paid for legislators, are more dangerous to the safety of this nation than is Al-Qaeda or any other terrorist organization. They are the enemies of the safety of America. And what is worse, unlike terrorists who wreak mayhem in the name of some ideal, they are doing it for money, which is 1,000 times more disgusting than terrorists who at least mistakenly think that they're serving a noble cause. These people kill 30,000 Americans a year for money, for profit. You cannot get lower on the evolutionary scale of humanity than that. No excuse about hunting, home protection, or sports can justify the sea of blood, the carnage that comes out of this for-profit controlled business that has turned homes and schools into battlegrounds. I can reiterate that last part if I went too fast for you. Well, we do have this text from the Bible, so let me get to that. This ancient biblical bit of prophetic wisdom, assigned almost randomly by the lectionary to be read aloud in churches this week, Isaiah says, "If you will remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness, and your gloom will be like noonday. If you will remove the pointing of the finger, if you will stop fighting over resources and actually share your food, your resources with the hungry, then your anger can be lifted. The gloom can turn into light. On this 50th anniversary of the famous Civil Rights March on Washington, D.C., we have been reminded of how many times President Kennedy and others did not want the march to happen because they were certain that 500,000 black people who had suffered the violence of both discrimination and poverty, if brought together in one place on a hot day in the nation's capital, that there would be violence. It was not an unreasonable expectation that in force of numbers, an army of black people in Washington might decide to treat their oppressors as they had been treated for the last 200 years. But it was a nonviolent gathering, led by this nation's most ardent symbol of nonviolent social change, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now, historically speaking, it must be said that King's wasn't the only voice crying out against white oppression. There was on that day also Malcolm X, and it should never be forgotten that white America was not realistically presented with the choice of keeping the status quo. That wasn't really on the menu. Things were going to change, and they were either going to change in the nonviolent way that Martin Luther King pointed out, or they were going to change in the direction of someone more like Malcolm X, who was going to lead a way to liberation in what would likely be a much more violent transformation. King called for change through forgiveness and love, by acceptance, by working together, as seeing our plight. He said, we may have come to America on different kinds of ships, but we're all in the same boat now. Malcolm X, for most of his public career, called for isolation, for racial segregation, for transformation through a form of retaliation and by force. White America may have deserved Malcolm X's program, but by grace we were given Dr. Martin Luther King's dream of loving reconciliation. And we saw an echo of that grace this week when yet again an angry white young man went into a school with heavy weaponry and a taste for violence. But no one died this week in that Georgia school. No one was even injured. And you don't need for me to tell you that it was the NRA's executive vice president, Wayne LaPierre, who said after the Sandy Hook shootings that the only thing that stops a bad man with a gun is a good man with a gun. The school's bookkeeper, Antoinette Tuff, showed just how wrong Mr. LaPierre was. Armed with kindness, with acceptance, and even a willingness to be personally vulnerable, not just vulnerable to the possibility of being shot, but to the extent of talking to the man as if he were a human being, talking to him as if he were an equal. She shared her own life struggle. She identified with him. She let him know that her own life had been full of pain. She talked about a sad and unwanted divorce after a 30-year marriage. She opened her heart to him, and at one point, she was able to say convincingly, "I love you." She said that to the man that came in to kill her and 100 kids. She offered even to walk out with him when he was sure the police were going to shoot him when he gave up. She said, "A bullet doesn't have anybody's name on it. I'll walk out with you, and if they shoot, they're more likely to shoot me than to shoot you." She assured him that she would help him to end the crisis without anyone having to die. Because if you can set aside the yoke of anger, if you can set aside your resentment, if you can set aside your need for revenge, this is what Buddhists mean when they talk about emptying. When they talk about emptying, they mean setting aside all of that history of resentment, all the reasons that you have to be angry, all of the desire that you have for revenge, all of the need that you have to be self-protecting, if you can refrain from the pointing of the finger, if you can keep from speaking evil even against the people who have hurt you dramatically, hurt you economically, hurt you emotionally, hurt you professionally, if you can offer something of yourself, if you are willing to try to see even how much you have in common with your enemy, which is what Antoinette Tuff did. She talked to this really crazy young man who came in to die. It was his time to die. But she identified with him and found common ground. From a middle-aged black woman to an angry white young man, they found that both of them had some common areas of pain. If you will share your life with the people who hurt the most, then your light can rise even in the darkness of a lethal, deadly situation, and your gloom be like the noonday. And men and women, nobody had to die. Nobody died. Albert Einstein allegedly said, I can't prove it, but he's alleged to have said that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking that we use to create our problems. It takes a different kind of intelligence to solve problems than it takes to create problems. There is a certain macho appeal to revenge, to be the good guy with the gun when confronted with the bad guy with the gun, to fight back, to giving our enemies a taste of their own medicine. But you can never solve the world's problems by using the same techniques, the same intelligence, the same thinking pattern that got us into trouble in the first place. You have to be smarter than that. You have to be better than that. You have to be more thoughtful, better prepared. A good guy with a gun is the same thing as a bad guy with a gun, except that he has a noble view of himself. In most armed confrontations, both sides think they're the good guy with the gun. If someone in that Georgia school had pulled out a handgun out of their belt or out of a holster in their coat to confront this crazy young man who did, after all, have a military weapon, there's a good chance that 100 people would have died in the ensuing gun battle. But because no one drew a weapon on the other side, there was no good guy with a gun. There was a good woman with a heart. What Antoinette Tuff did that day could well be called miraculous, but you cannot call it accidental. She had taken training in crisis management. She had been through training under stress to put herself in that situation and had thought out in advance how to react if ever called upon to do so. And that's not training that you take one day in an in-service during the summer. To be the kind of person who practices patience, loving kindness, compassion, and empathy, you have to take a lot of refresher courses, and you have to do it every day. There's a saying I love from the Hasidic fathers that says, I did not go to the Majid to hear him teach Torah, but to see how he laced and unlaced his felt boots. That is to say, I didn't go to see the wise man for him to impart secret wisdom to me, but I wanted to just see how he put his shoes on in the morning. Because it is in the little things that you do every single day that you get ready for the day that Antoinette Tuff had to face, that she was prepared through training, through thinking about it, through the exercise of compassion, to show compassion in the most dramatic circumstance possible. When we have our Sunday school kids make a bunch of sandwiches to take to the homeless veterans, it's not that we are solving the problem of hunger in Springfield. When we take a hot meal to 200 people every single week who are living in their cars in abandoned buildings along the railroad tracks at Commercial Street, we are not solving poverty. We are exercising compassion. We are learning compassion by doing it week after week after week. We are teaching our children to think not only of themselves, but to think of others. We are meeting people at Bill's place and learning to see them as people It's not just the numbers of the homeless. It's not just the numbers of people that live in the Harmony House, the Family Violence Center here in Springfield. We know the people. We know the names. The point is not the sandwiches the kids make or the meals that we serve. The point is that it changes us, because we are, every one of us, in training. We come in here and we read these ancient texts and we sing these songs about justice and fairness, and we pray in hope of a new beginning. We symbolically share in a meal that represents a vision of when everyone has a place at the table. And as many of you know, you will be tested. There will be times when you will be called upon to give voice to a meaningful response in a situation of violence. I was tested early in life. I was still in seminary when I was called to the home of a parishioner who was in a domestic dispute. And by the time I arrived at their home out in the country, it had become a hostage situation. The very inebriated man held me and his estranged wife and his mother and brother hostage for 5 hours with a shotgun pointed right at my face. He was wearing ammunition belts crisscrossed on his chest, and his plan was to wait for the police, have a shootout with the police until he was running out of ammunition, and then he was going to kill us and kill himself. Fortunately, no one called the police, and the police did not come. So I had time to talk him down, to talk him into eventually laying his rifle down and letting us all leave alive. So the day ended well, in a way, but there is a price that is paid for that kind of thing. I can confess to you now that I personally did not sleep all the way through the night for more than 2 years after that event. I was just 23 years old when that happened. And I doubt that Antoinette Tuff is going to sleep very well for a long time. The leaders of the famous March on Washington, D.C. 50 years ago went through extensive training to choose to be nonviolent. They were prepared to be beaten with the police billy clubs, to have vicious dogs turn loose on them. They knew that fire hoses and tear gas would be used, and that it was possible that some of them would die from bullets or bombs. I believe that it was Daniel Berrigan who said that we must often bait the trap for evil using our own flesh as bait. There is risk involved in being a peacemaker. There has to be a willingness to make personal sacrifices if you are going to change the world for the better. You have to decide that forgiveness is preferable to revenge, that acceptance is better than judgment. You have to choose to extend love even to the people who have hurt you the most. You have to be willing to put your pointing finger back in your pocket and expose your own failings, your own hurts, your own heart, to empathize with those who are currently in pain. Today, we give thanks that the incident in Atlanta did not turn out the way that Sandy Hook did 9 months ago. And we resolve, all of us, I hope, all of us, that we will prepare our hearts and mind to play the kind of role that Antoinette Tuff played, should we ever have the opportunity to be the one who uses acceptance and love in the place of bullets and fists. Amen.
You've been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at reverenddray@aol.com for more information.